And good morning and welcome to the Skinny for Friday, April 24th. I'm Mitch Perry, the senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix, joined by my colleague, Ray Roa, the editor-in-chief of Creative Loafing newspaper. Ray, good morning.
Good morning, Mitch. Happy to be here. Happy to have the bootleg tropical heat wave schedule in my hand from Sean. Obviously, there's one online, but he's made a bootleg one, and it's awesome.
Yes. So tell our listeners, we'll be there, right, tomorrow. I'm definitely going to be there for Tropical Heat Wave, the big annual confab the station puts on every year. Usually it's the first weekend or so in May, a little earlier this year, but it's going to be a great music festival, and we'd love to see you out there tomorrow.
Yeah, for sure. I had a good time at Creative Loafing, kind of looking back at old Tribune clippings from like the first few heat waves to see how they wrote about it. And heat wave, it's just cool to be out at the Cuban Club with everybody.
And it won't be super hot, right? The weather's been outstanding. So anyway, so on the show today, later on, we're going to talk about some news, some drug news. Donald Trump announced he's rescheduling cannabis from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3 drug later this month. What does that mean? We're also going to be talking with a top Democratic Party strategist who lives here in the Tampa Bay area about lots of stuff. And it's been a really interesting week. Oh, before we even get to that, Ray, I saw on social media, you're going to be, there's a documentary on Democracy Now!, the great show hosted by Amy Goodman for 30 years now, and it's coming out in a few weeks, and you're going to be interviewing Amy Goodman?
It was crazy. Tim from Sunray said he booked this movie, and he's like, do you want to do the Q&A? And I was like, with Amy Goodman? And then I got really scared, and I was like, I'm very scared right now. I'm going to say yes. That's my rule. If I'm terrified, I say yes.
I was in this like 22 years ago. I introduced her at when she spoke like a couple of times, but once in the Straws, and in front of like one of the big theaters there, and I was really nervous about that.
Dude, Amy Goodman, if you listen, obviously I've listened to this radio station pretty much my whole life, and it's like she's up here, right? I mean, that body of work is incredible.
Congrats on that, and look forward to that. Hey, so we've got in studio right now a young man named Jackson McMillan. You might remember him. He was in the news a lot a year ago. He is a political strategist, very young man who, Jackson, let's say hi to you.
He's here.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. It's good to be back.
It's great to have you here with us here. And we'll get into it. I guess basically, Jackson, Key Lime Strategies, that's your firm, as it were. How long have you been doing business, basically?
So I've been working on political campaigns since 2020 originally. I'd been a volunteer in the previous cycle before that, but nothing too in-depth. I started as a manager, a field director, lots of different jobs, wearing lots of different hats for local campaigns. And then in late 2022, early 2023, we started specializing in digital fundraising, which is basically online fundraising through all its forms. And that kind of exploded as a business model. So while we do provide other offerings still, like general strategy, other media or vendor services, our primary focus and what we are nationally known for at this point is our online fundraising efforts.
And you certainly were so successful with that last year. Folks might remember there was those two special congressional elections in Florida last year. Right after it was the only elections going on the early part of 2025. You had in Congressional District 1, that was where that was Matt Gaetz' seat. But Matt Gaetz, who was, we forget this now, he was the original pick for Donald Trump to be the Attorney General. That didn't work out for Matt, but that seat was open. And so there was a race there, Jimmy Patronis against Republican Jimmy Patronis against Democrat Gabe Valmont in a super conservative area. And then also in District 6, where Mike Waltz, who is now our U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, was chosen. He also had a different position then. He was the national security advisor, but nevertheless, there was an opening there. Randy Fine ran against Josh Wheel, and you were running the Democratic campaigns in both those cases. Those were seats that were won roughly, tell me, Jackson, 30, 35 points that Republicans, or, Trump won those districts by 30 points, and roughly the Republican incumbents in November of 2024.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and so it was, super impossible, almost, nothing's impossible in the world, right? But very hard that you were going to swing those seats. And I think you cut the margins in half, roughly. Is that how it worked?
Just over half, about. So one of them performed a little bit better than the other.
Yeah, but it was a big story because they raised a lot of money. You helped raise much more money than the Republicans did, because they took it for granted, I think, basically. They thought it was going to be a slam dunk. And it was a little bit controversial, right? Let's put that out there, because your firm did well because you fundraised very successfully, and there was criticism that I don't know that you were selling that people. I think one of the criticisms which I thought was not accurate was people are giving all these money to these campaigns where these people can't win. And they should be giving it to the Democratic Party for registration efforts. And look, so much of that money came from outside of Florida because this was people who were frustrated Democrats around the country who were angry at Donald Trump and wanted to somehow do something about it. And so, hey, there's some Democrats running in congressional races. I want to give to them. So that's where a lot of that money came from. A lot of it was out of state. And some people thought you were playing straight up there. What's your thoughts a year later looking back at that?
So I did want to clarify one thing really quickly, which is that I was not the lead strategist on either of those campaigns. My job was strictly to raise money.
Okay.
I did end up doing a little bit of strategy consulting for the Wheel campaign towards the end when their operation was scaling up and they needed some more experienced folks in the room. But that was less than, I'd say, 20% of the campaign. But I was on both campaigns 100% of the time in a fundraising capacity. What I will say is this. Is that Donald Trump did not think these races were unwinnable. His strategist did not think those races were unwinnable. His leading pollster posted online a poll of Josh Wheel winning the race.
Tony Fabrizio.
Fabrizio, yes. I believe it was 5 weeks before Election Day. In order to rally Republican turnout to actually get people out to the polls, President Trump held multiple telephone town halls within the district, in both districts. Donald Trump is the most powerful player in the Republican Party. His time and energy is worth a lot of money and effort to them. They would not have deployed their queen, to use the chess analogy, if they didn't feel like the game was at risk, right? And so at the moment, I thought those races were totally winnable. And even looking back, I think that they really had to move a lot of chess pieces around in order to secure those victories. And additionally, what is often not discussed is that ongoing at the same time were a bunch of Supreme Court races across the country. And Democrats,
Wisconsin, I think, was one of them.
Democrats picked up victories in almost all of those. And looking back, then we forced Republicans to pay attention and use their queen, for the lack of a better word, in Florida, of all places, that they had just won by a significant margin. I don't think it was a waste of effort. I don't think it was a waste of money. And I think we made really good pushes and inroads in those districts that were then that's all been built on, right? Like a lot of that infrastructure, a lot of that talent that got hired and trained during those campaigns is now available to current congressional races and other races, which we have a significant problem with here in Florida, is availability of staff to work on Democratic campaigns. There's a lot that not only was it winnable in the moment, there's a lot of good that came out of those campaigns that is going to benefit Florida in the long haul.
And we are again talking to Jackson McMillan, a Democratic Party strategist. How should I describe you?
I like strategists.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I want to open the phones right now, 813-239-9663. I realize sometimes on our shows we don't do that enough, but I really want listener participation here. So Colin here, Jackson's here with us for a good part of the show.
24 years old. I don't think you said that, right?
No, I have not.
He sounds like a young man because he is a young man.
And you've been at Stetson getting your law degree.
Yes, yeah. I actually, my last day of classes is Monday. I've been there for 3 years now, sitting for the Florida Bar this summer. Go Hatters. I love Stetson Law. It's been a great experience.
Okay, so let's talk about some stuff that's going on politically right now, if we could. Ray, I wanted to mention to you, so Jake Collins, this week began really interesting for me.
Bizarre.
On Sunday afternoon, we got an email saying Jake Collins is hosting a press conference in St. Pete on Monday morning. And some folks, if you're really following Florida politics, know that there was rumors Jay had to go cut a video last week in a car where he was denying that he was going to be, getting out of the race. And so I thought, what's this press conference going to be about? Well, what he was he kind of took off the gloves off against Byron Donalds, who, Republicans have been wanting to see some of this because, we had Paul Renner on here a couple weeks ago, who's also running for governor of the Republican nomination. And we asked him, and he says, oh, no, I don't think Byron Donalds has been vetted at all here from the media, what have you. And so interestingly, so he actually distributed what you might call a dossier of.
That's the book.
He listed, it's called Congressman Byron Donalds' Liabilities. And so it was just the opposite of like him jumping out. He was saying, I'm fully in, and by the way, this guy is not who you think he is. And it was actually very convenient because, my editor had recently been saying, like, we need to dig into more what Byron Donalds is about. So this basically is a compendium of stuff that's already been published, articles about Byron, some of it negative, about some of his associations. I don't know if I don't think any of it though is like damning at all. It was just, Byron had previously said when it came to selling cannabis, okay, he had definitely, he had been possessed cannabis and he'd been arrested for that. And then it came out in an interview like a month ago that he actually sold it. So, but for Jay Collins, it was this man selling drugs. Jay took it the whole darkest way of looking at it. You've been watching that race, Jackson. What's your thoughts about what's going on right there in the Republican race for governor?
So I think the answer to that is pretty simple, which is that in campaigns, there's two avenues you have to look at: what you're saying and how you're getting it out to people, right? Because most people, the average voter, does not pay attention to politics. If anything, maybe they get a trickle of news in the morning, but not, or at night when they turn on, the TV, but not a crazy ton. So you have to actually bring the message to them, right? And that requires resources. Lieutenant Governor Jay Collins does not have any resources. And so he's resorting to the most extreme messaging possible to attempt to make a dent on the perceived frontrunner because he doesn't have the resources to get that out there. So he's requiring on people like us here talking on the radio to take that controversial statement and amplify that message functionally for free. That's what he's doing from a political strategy perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And Byron Donalds, right? He's got a lot of money, $67 billion. Yeah. And we saw a lot of ads. I know during the Final Four, the NCAA tournament a few weeks ago, it was nonstop. And basically all of those ads were showing was like he was endorsed by Donald Trump, which absolutely in a Republican primary is, led him to have this huge lead over this Republican candidates. Jackson, do you think that with Donald Trump's political numbers, including here in Florida, but nationally, really at its lowest of both of his two terms, we're talking about 35%, 36% right now. Could that be a liability in this general election, whether it's Jerry Demings or David Jolly running against Byron Donalds, the Trump numbers there?
I don't think it's a liability in the primary.
Right.
I do think potentially in the general, we're seeing major slippage among Hispanic communities.
Right.
All across the country. We had some Virginia special elections the other night. Counties that lean Hispanic high levels in population were the counties that shifted to the left the most. We're seeing similar things around the state of Florida here in special elections. I definitely think it could hurt him there. There's definitely a big opportunity to close that gap with Hispanic voters around the country.
Not to shift too much here, and I know we're a long ways out here, but knowing what you know now, do you think this is winnable for Jolly at this point?
Hard to say. I would say that, if Jolly's our nominee, I'm going to vote for him. I'm going to donate to him and I'm going to volunteer for him. I'm not on the Jolly campaign, to be clear.
You've been a little critical at times?
I have, yeah.
Yeah.
But
do you think he has it, by the way? I mean, the one poll from Emerson last week had him up, 23-10 over Jerry Demings, but over 50% didn't have an opinion on it. So I think Jerry Demings still has very much a path to get more competitive in this race at least.
Well, remember how we were just saying that there's two avenues and campaigns that you have to think of, which is one, what are you saying? And two, how are you getting the word out about it? Jolly's way of getting the word out about it has been traveling around the state, going to events. With all due respect to him and his campaign, the only voters who have time to go and sit in a room and listen to David Jolly talk for 2 hours are very privileged voters who are consistent voters, but they are not even close to the majority of voters. If that is your only avenue of getting the word out, you're not going to reach many voters for the primary or the general.
Well, that's the fact that because David has always, the brief time he was in Congress, he hated fundraising. And that is a big part of this job as a candidate. Now he's had, I think, announced numbers. He's around $5 million, which is certainly more than Jerry Demings has reported so far. And again, if people aren't familiar, Jerry Demings is the mayor of Orange County, who is also the other major Democrat running against former Congressman Jolly here for the Democratic nomination. You're right, though. But Jolly, so right, those are some political folks. We've seen him a lot here, out there. But now social media, I know as a young guy, this is what so much of this is all about. And Jerry Demings had so little social media. It was shocking to me as a candidate in 2026. I know he recently fired his campaign manager, so I think somebody realized that was not appropriate the way he was doing that campaign so far.
I'm actually not aware of that firing. This is the first time hearing of it. Yeah. But I do know that the Jolly campus struggled as well to get their social media game going. Now, I will say to their credit, they are starting to release some videos that I shared one the other day and said that this was a move in the right direction. But I think they've got a long way to go. I mean, Jolly actually has a primary competitor, a teacher from South Florida named Dana Marie Foster.
I just got an email about her.
Yeah,
I don't know much. She has,
I guess. I was just looking the other day when I was sitting down with the Times. I think she has 38 times the number of TikTok followers that Jolly does. And TikTok's not just a young person thing anymore. The vast majority of Americans have TikTok. That is a real communication stream that you can't buy political ad placement on. It's all about that organic traction. It's about clipping. It's about third-party accounts. It's not enough to just have one social media person anymore. You need a social media apparatus. And the fact that they're hiring social media staff means that they are not campaigning for the 2026 era. And that's really concerning to me.
Again, if you're just tuning in right now, you're listening to Skinny here on WMNF 88.5 FM. It's 1121. I'm Mitch Perry. I'm speaking here with Jackson McMillan, Democratic strategist. We're going to be talking to somebody in the hemp industry coming up a little later in the program here. But welcoming your phone calls, actually. And so let's go to the calls right now, if we could, Jackson. We've got so much to want to talk to Jackson about here. I don't know if we'll get it all in this hour here. But let's see here. Let's go to Simon. Okay, Simon calling in from Lakeland. Simon, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I wanted to ask Jackson a question. It seems as though in the Democratic Party, nationally as well as locally, the litmus test seems to be on the AIPAC issue and the funding of military aid to Israel. Now, the mechanism of the military aid is that Israel has to take that $3.8 billion and spend that entirety in the United States. In essence, it's a coupon. My question is, and I haven't heard this brought up, what do you say to the 20,000 American employees that benefit from that subsidized $3.8 billion, and many of them living in Florida? What should they do if they lose their job, those 20,000 employees across the country, on that military subsidy?
Okay, thank you. And that's a really interesting way of bringing this issue up about AIPAC and about Israel. So I give you credit for being very creative there, Simon. I don't know if you want to... But anyway, you respond the way you want to respond, Jackson.
So I think the important thing to note with the AIPAC and Palestine issue is that there is a subsect of voters who do have clear empathy and feel very strong feelings about what's going on in the Middle East and has been ongoing for a long time, right? That's not a new issue. What is new is the massive economic disparity in the United States and the complete destruction of the middle class. What you have to understand is that these voters are not outraged at AIPAC because they hate Jewish people. They're not outraged at AIPAC because they hate Israel. What they're outraged at is they see those really big numbers going in that direction, regardless of whether or not it's coming back to the United States. They don't understand that, right? And so what's happening is they're going, that money should be reinvested in Americans. And I think, to your point, if the money is being reinvested in Americans, then the politicians who are pro this plan aren't doing a good job of communicating to voters that the money is being reinvested in the U.S. And because voters are still under the impression that billions, if not trillions of dollars are being sent overseas when they are struggling to meet their basic needs. And I think that voters are, in the same way that many voters bought into Donald Trump's mass deportation plans as a solution to the affordability crisis, a lot of voters are, whether or not it's right or not, just even though we know Donald Trump's plan wasn't a good plan, they're looking for politicians who have a plan and are willing to stick to it to make their lives better. So if a politician says Israel's the problem, AIPAC's the problem, then voters are going to believe that because right now they are so desperate for a solution that they are willing to buy into strong, firm politicians on both sides of the aisle with a plan to make their lives more affordable. And if that plan is getting rid of AIPAC, then they're going to buy into it. I think it's honestly, it's deeper. And the old saying in politics is it's the economy, stupid. Every issue comes back to that. Voters are struggling. And I think that the AIPAC issue is more of a reflection on the frustration of that multi-billion-dollar number, not a reflection of anti-Semitism rising or thoughts on the actual conflict.
Thank you, Simon. Speaking of that, I saw so Alexander Vindman, who is the one of the leading candidates, there's also Angie Nixon running for the Senate Democratic nomination for Senate here. He was asked, I believe, read this the other day, about funding for Israel weapons because, again, I think it was 40 Democrats who voted voted against this recently in Congress. So this is definitely an issue, as Simon brings up. This is very relevant in politics on both sides of the aisle right now. But anyway, I mentioned Vindman because he's going to be in the Tampa Bay area this weekend, actually. First time we've really seen him. I think I'm going to see him tonight, actually. And you wrote about Vindman because he, of course, what he's done, like his brother, who was out of Virginia, congressman, these guys can raise money, okay? I don't know what kind of a candidate is. I've never seen him in person. That's why I'm looking forward to seeing him. But these guys can raise money. Anyway, you wrote on January 20th, you wrote, Vindman is going to quickly hit a wall that all statewide candidates in Florida hit. Nice haul. Now, good luck finding enough competent Democratic staff, especially this late in the game. Also, his day one showing demonstrates just how pathetic Joey's raising to date is. Okay, so Vindman is again, he's just introducing himself to Floridians right now. Polls have shown him, I think the most recent one had him down 7 points to GOP incumbent Ashley Moody. Moody has been, whatever you want to say about her, she's been elected statewide twice in the state. So she's somewhat of a known quantity. But I don't know if she's really distinguished herself in the 1 year in the Senate. So what about this Senate race? You looking, again, from your Democratic strategist perspective?
I have a lot of thoughts on this race. So I do think that Vindman is going, the percentage of Democratic voters that see AIPAC as a breaking point issue and arms to Israel as a breaking point issue is increasing every single day. Because of the affordability issues I was talking about earlier. Vindman can talk a lot about affordability, but I've yet to really see him. You can call out the problem, but voters don't need you to call out the problem. They need to tell you they need to know what your solution is. And I've seen Vindman say, call out the affordability crisis, but I've yet to hear him articulate what his solution is.
Well, if you want to hear me, and this is kind of cynical, what have you, our politics are so much about against, so the fact is right now the fervor in politics is against Donald Trump, just like it was, somewhat against Joe Biden, I guess you could say, among some folks who were struggling with inflation a couple of years ago. And, the Tea Party comes from Barack Obama, et cetera, et cetera. There are some tangible things you can do. Maybe you can do legislatively on the affordability issue. It's a great issue to run on. It's a harder issue to fix, right? I mean, because when it comes to inflation, you can't do that. But you can do certain things. I'm not saying you couldn't. In the state, certainly when it comes to property insurance, maybe even property taxes, although certainly the way that it's being argued with Ron DeSantis, I don't even know what the heck's going on with that. Again, if you're just tuning in right now, you're listening to The Skinny here on WMNF 88.5 FM. I'm Mitch Perry. I'm the senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix, here every week with my colleague Ray Roa. Ray actually had to step out, so you'll just be hearing me asking questions. It's not like we're silencing him, Ray, here right now. So also, okay, let's just get really inside Democratic politics. And we kind of are talking about this Israel issue, but it's becoming more of a mainstream issue. But how about the man named Hassan Piker? Are you familiar with him?
Very much so.
Okay, right. So I think some of us who follow politics closely are getting more familiar with him. Now, again, you say if you're more into YouTube, the TikTok, variety, people, a podcaster, I guess Hassan Piker is a podcaster. So it's become like a litmus test. Is he a good thing, a bad thing for Democrats? Should they campaign with him? Because he's made some very provocative comments about Israel and about America. And actually, I read an interesting piece in Vox.com this morning by a writer Eric Levitz, who said he had more issues with Hassan Piker about his comments about the Chinese Communist Party and Chairman Mao Zedong. And this is what Eric Levitt said about Piker. He says, on topics as varied as Chinese communism, Russian imperialism, and Islamic terrorism, Piker's commentary is often just as ethically rudderless as what it claims to oppose. If Washington's jingoists downplay or rationalize the crimes of America and Israel, Piker does much the same for those nations' adversaries. And he basically takes them to task for basically supporting like the Chinese Communist Party and things like that. You see this with some on the left, the far left. There is a I don't want to say American spirit, maybe there is there, but really wanting to align with some of the most radical parties around the world. Anyway, we don't want to get too deep in the weeds though. But Piker, your thoughts?
So I think this is pretty simple, which is that in an era where voters are consuming their information less and less from cable TV, which has been the Democratic playbook for the better part of 40 years at this point, we need all the eyeballs on our message. Again, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. In politics, there's two things: what you're saying and how you're getting it to people. Mitch, you and I probably don't agree on 100% of issues politically, but yet I am still happy to come here and have a conversation with you. It is undoubtable that Mr. Piker has a massive audience. His daily Twitch stream viewership is on average higher than 10x all the prospective political candidates for the Democratic nomination. All their podcasts combined have multiplied by 10, and you still wouldn't reach Piker's daily viewership. Right? Like, he has a massive audience.
Yes.
You don't have to agree with him on 100% of things to get on his audience.
Right, and to be on his show.
Right.
I've heard Rahm Emanuel, by the way, who I'm sure disagrees with a lot of what Piker's saying. He said he would go on his show, actually.
Right. I mean, you don't have to agree on 100% of things to use that way of getting the word out. Right.
Well, I think, by the way, that's just good in our politics. Last week at Tampa Tiger Bay Club, Republican Attorney General James Othmeyer appeared, and that was very interesting, very provocative. But also, I was told by a Tampa Tiger Bay member that morning is that they were really excited to have him because for some reason, because it's certainly not the case now in Tampa, that Tiger Bay Club, it has a reputation of being liberal, right? So Republicans, he was telling me they've invited Ron DeSantis over the years, Rick Scott, Pam Bondi, none of these big Republicans would come on. They were really excited to have Othmeyer, and Othmeyer embraced it, okay? And I think, and it was I got a great story out of it. It was really interesting. But I think that this perception and, and by the way, the Tampa Tiger Bay Club is not all liberals, okay? If you've been at this event. Well, I was told by our friend Barry Edwards that he did recent demographic polling, and he said that in the city of Tampa, and we know this, we know where Republicans in the last 3 years have been the leading people in terms of registration and who have moved into the state because we've had tremendous growth. It's slowed down the last year or so, but we had so much growth in the state from post-COVID. And he said that in Tampa, the breakdown was 49-48 Democrat to Republican. Into the city of Tampa being basically an even, swing city, if you will. This has got a reputation. Now, you think maybe it's a little different than that, but nevertheless, the point being, I saw some prominent Republicans at this event last week, and so certainly this perception that club is all liberals is an outdated one. Okay, another post I want to read to you that you wrote about that's very interesting. I think you referenced this earlier in your post about Vindman, was you wrote, I forget what date this was, but you said massive shortage of on-the-ground in-persons in Florida right now. CM, what does CM mean?
Campaign manager.
Okay, right. He said campaigns with real money reaching out to me every day asking if I know people. Right, because we're seeing some people still, the qualifying date to run for state legislative seats is not until June. So some people, there's still some open races here. And obviously, with the mood changing here, we saw that with the shocking victory of Brian Nathan last month. Every potential seat that's maybe within 10 points, Democrats should probably run somebody. Now, I don't know. That's another whole issue. Should they run a candidate in every race? But, okay, I'm throwing too many things out at you. But this idea, is this still the deal right now where some Democrats running are like, I need people to help me run this campaign?
Most of them. Yeah. If you talk to the most well-funded congressional campaigns across the state right now, they've got their consultants, right? They've got their senior strategists. They are desperate for competent people on the ground working with them on a day-to-day basis. That's another big reason why a lot of big Democrats running in the state right now are struggling with social media. Again, it is not a lack of money. It is a lack of talent. There are just not enough people who know how to do that well in the political world. And the reason why is because it's unsustainable. As long as social media is a last 6 month stretch hire for Democratic campaigns, it does not make sense for someone to go into business with themselves functionally working 6 months out of every 24 months. So in order to do that, you would have to charge exorbitant rates that only the absolute highest fundraising candidates like Vindman, for instance, could even afford, right? Or you don't work. The business model is not there for an individual who works on one campaign at a time. It's not there for we've looked into at Key Lime running a social media division because there's so much demand for it.
Wow.
It's not sustainable. The good talent is, in corporate America right now, a good social media strategist is going to run you $135,000 a year. We can't afford as a small firm,
right,
to pay two of those people to handle a dozen campaigns for 6 months, and most campaigns couldn't afford it. So we've shirked that business model because it's not sustainable, even for a firm with other income and other staying power.
Okay, again, if you're just tuning in right now, that's the voice of Jackson McMillan, Democratic Party strategist. We're going to go move in a minute here, but we've got a couple of phone calls here. So let's talk. Let's get somebody along. David's been waiting patiently. He wants to talk about the DeSantis presidency. Good morning, David.
Yeah, I was curious what your guest thought about potential DeSantis president run again, and whether what he'll do in the interim, because he's getting term limited out here shortly.
He is. David, thank you for the phone call. So much we could talk about with Ron DeSantis, but, a story came out the other day, by the way. I don't know if you saw this, Mark Caputo in Axios, who wrote, and he's got good sources in the Trump White House, and the way the story came out, it seemed, again, like it was coming from the Trump people when they were kind of demeaning DeSantis away. It said that DeSantis was begging the White House for a job and referred to what I've written about in the past, which is possibly now the Attorney General job is open still. Maybe he's not interested in that, but Defense Secretary and a Supreme Court justice nomination. But Ron DeSantis, I think, Jackson, I don't think he's going to run for president, though. I think I'm willing to say that right now in 28, because if you think about it, it's all, it's a year and a half. Oh, it's 2 years. Let's not, we still got 2 years. But basically, if you look at the machinations from when he ran a couple years ago, he was ready to go right after the 22 election, and he's not going to be ready to go. I don't know, but we'll see. The redistricting thing, people think he wants to make a good impression by making a really gerrymandered map next week. But Ron DeSantis, do you see this guy ever being president? I guess I'll put it that way.
I think everyone has a ceiling. And when you get to the point of running for president, the game changes from your distribution mechanism and what you're saying to you really have to rely on organic channels to get the word out about you. And that, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, kind of comes down to vibes. And DeSantis just does not have it. I think he's hit his ceiling as governor, frankly. People around him don't like DeSantis. People say all the time, DeSantis doesn't have any friends.
Right.
DeSantis has people who work for him, right? And that's because he's not a person that inspires positive relationships or loyalty. And those are things that are required. People have to get that sauce off of you, for the lack of a better word, right? Like to buy into a presidential campaign. It's unquestionable that Donald Trump has it. He has armies of loyalists around the country who he sells out on a daily basis, and yet they don't blink, right? DeSantis just doesn't have that same, cult following that President Trump has. And it takes people endorsing you. And he struggled with that when he ran for president the first time. I think he would struggle with that again because people don't like, it's the Hamilton analogy. It's like you could grab a beer with him. Nobody wants to grab a beer with Ron DeSantis because he'd probably spit it all over you.
There you go. Let's go to another call. Let's go to John in Lutz. He wants to talk about AIPAC. Good morning, John.
Yes, good morning. I have to say, for a Democratic strategist who says that the outrage directed toward AIPAC has to do with, the way it affects us here at home and not the fact that we've live stream watched 100,000 people murdered and slaughtered is the most inhumane, outrageous, shocking statement I've ever heard. And it's why we are purging the Democratic Party of people who are like that, who think that we can sit and watch Israeli snipers shoot kids in the heads and Israeli jet fighters dropping bombs on families with their U.S. bombs and not think that we're going to be morally affected by that. We're going to remove these kind of immoral, inhumane people from the Democratic Party because it's shockingly disgusting.
Okay, John, thank you for the comment.
Here's what I have to say about that. It is disgusting what we've had to watch live streamed in the Middle East. My argument was not that people don't care. It was that people are angry in general and they're struggling. And that makes them, we humans are just animals, right? Cornered animals are more likely prone to rage. And we've seen that, and we are all cornered economically right now. The economic system we are in is not built for us. It's just not. And that means that things like that, those disgusting things we have to watch live streamed overseas, inflame our existing anger all the more, right? And so I do think there are a lot of folks out there like yourself who are primarily motivated by watching those tragedies happen overseas, right? But I also think there are a lot of people where it's compounding. They might be able to ignore it if they were doing well, but the fact that they're not, and that they have to watch those disgusting things every day, pushes them over the edge. I was not ignoring or underplaying it, and I'm sorry you felt that way.
Okay, cool. Jackson, hang out here. We're going to bring in our other guest here, and that's Carlos Hermida. We're going to pivot slightly, although we can stay on the political realm because everything is politics here. Now, Carlos is the owner of hemp shops in both Tampa and St. Petersburg, though you're closing your shop in St. Petersburg this week, and that's something we want to talk about. You're also a member of the Suncoast chapter of NORML and a co-host of the Suncoast NORML's weekly podcast. What's that called, by the way?
It's called The Rotation.
The Rotation. I get the tweets about it every week. He's some big guests on there. Okay, Carlos, we also want to bring up, of course, cannabis, which I know you're an expert on, the respect of that. We heard yesterday Donald Trump announced that he's fulfilling his promise on rescheduling marijuana from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3 drug. We've talked about that in the show previously. For the rank and file consumer, does this really do much?
It does and it doesn't. First off, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, great to have you here.
I think it's very important. I don't want to get into this whole Carlos Hermida is just going to hate on Donald Trump thing.
Yeah, we don't need that.
I'm not trying to get down that. It's important to point out that this step is one of the biggest steps towards cannabis reform that a president has taken since it was made illegal, I guess.
Yeah.
Kudos to Donald Trump. Kudos to opening up for more research. And that's essentially the argument of why it needs to go to Schedule 3 is that we need to study it a little bit more. But what it does for American people, essentially it only really helps out corporate cannabis businesses and pharmaceutical companies. Moving it to Schedule 3 does two things for the business. First off, it allows for cannabis companies that are currently growing and distributing cannabis to file tax write-offs. When it was originally Schedule 1, there was tax code 280E, which would not allow cannabis companies to claim deductions on their taxes.
Does this still? I know banking is still very hard, right? The industry does that get changed at all here?
Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Changing that tax code actually allows for banks to kind of do business with the industry a little bit more. It also allows for pharmaceutical companies to come in and work in the industry. Other than that, there's really not many other changes. Cannabis that doesn't come from a dispensary is still considered to be Schedule 1, I believe.
Right, it's medical marijuana, I think is really right.
It's state-approved medical marijuana.
That's what the executive order states. Let's talk about you personally here. So you've had two businesses, or you've had a business in Ybor City for how long?
For about 8-9 years now.
Okay, and then you the last couple of years you've had one on Central Avenue.
For 3 years, yeah.
And you're closing that down this weekend.
Yeah, this weekend we're going to go ahead and shut the doors down.
Why is that?
Well, there's a lot of different reasons for it. And, we could talk about a change of demographic in St. Pete. We could, but when it comes down to it, we're, our lease is up at the end of this month. And, we're just not making enough money for it to make sense.
Speaking about Trump, he also announced, of course, last year when it comes to hemp, which is what you have sold there, is that the hemp industry basically, at least as of now, is supposed to go away at the end of this year. Now, I want to bring up, I was looking this up, though. So let's see here. Give me a moment. So there's legislation, though. James Comer, he was the Oversight and Government Reform Committee chairman in the House, he's proposed delaying the ban until November of 2027. And also, let's see, there's a bill by Rand Paul, Amy Klobuchar, and Joni Ernst in the Senate called the Hemp Safety Enforcement Act, which would effectively let states opt out of the federal recrimination of hemp THC products that is set to be enacted later this year. So we'll see. I think that there's going to be something. There's just too much money in this industry for it to kill.
Yeah, at this point, the industry's nationwide, and there's some big pockets in the industry that can actually lobby towards change now, and there's organizations that come together in order to do that. But essentially the idea is that if we shut down the industry at the end of this year, there's farmers are going to lose their jobs. People like me who own retail stores going to have to close down their stores. There's a whole manufacturing and distribution side to this industry that's just going to shut down. And I mean, that's a lot of money. I mean, hemp.
And let me bring this up. And again, if you're just tuning in, 11:45, you're listening to The Skinny here. I'm talking to Carlos Hermida. He is a hemp entrepreneur, if you will. We're also have Jackson McMillan, a Democratic strategist, both here in the studio here. Welcome your texts and emails. Jackson, an email for you. This person wrote, your guest has talked a lot about how our current economics aren't working. What would he propose as a solution to economic distress that candidates should embrace?
I'm so glad you asked. This is something we mentioned earlier on the show that I'm finishing up my third year of law school. I study consumer protection law. And that is basically protecting folks from scammers, from junk fees, banks, and other big organizations that don't follow the laws that are designed to protect consumers. And what we see the most over there is that there is one key variable that has shifted in the last 25 years that is causing this distress, which is CEO compensation. CEO compensation. The number one thing that I would propose, and this can be done at a state and a federal level, is that I am actually not an advocate of taxing the rich.
Oh no! They're trying to do in California.
I am an advocate because I think that is not a one size fits all solution. And I'm a business owner myself. I've owned multiple businesses. I'm a capitalist, right? What I propose is that the gap between what CEOs are being paid and what their lowest rung laborers are being paid has expanded year over year over year over year to where it's untenable. So here's what I propose. If a company or the leadership of that company is that gap goes over a certain threshold that would have to be evaluated probably on a state-to-state basis, but potentially at a federal level as well, is over a certain distance percentage, then the government is already subsidizing their company by paying for things like food stamps and things like that, right? And healthcare for people who can't afford it. The government is already paying to subsidize that business. Their business is not actually successful unless it is subsidized by the U.S. government. So how we fix that and bring a more capitalistic and fair economy is that if we are subsidizing your business anyways, then your business gets taxed more. And that would encourage folks to distribute profits more fairly over their entire labor force. Yeah. Because then they know that they have a business that works without the U.S. government. In fact, that would hopefully the way that would play out in the long term is that we have more businesses and a more capitalistic society because it doesn't, it demonstrates that businesses work without the federal and without state governments. And if your business doesn't work without the government, that's when they step in and go, okay, then you have to pay your fair share. Right?
Now, speaking of government, let's bring you back in, Carlos, because you got a visit from a government official a couple weeks ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, from the Florida Department of Agriculture.
Yeah, and what was up with that?
Well, I mean, for having a hemp license, you're subject to inspections. Some people more so than others. And we were having a kind of a party to, say goodbye. You mentioned that I'm deputy director of Suncoast NORML. We were having a blunt rolling contest.
And that seems, innocent enough.
I mean, it's to some people, yes. To other people, no. There was somebody that I assume complained to the Department of Agriculture, and it caused them to send out an inspector, a few weeks before we closed to make sure that everything was on the up and up. And I mean, they tried to, the inspector was quite good, and the inspector himself wasn't trying to hurt my business in any way. I should say that. Yeah. Nick was wonderful. But one of the first things that they did was they took a look at our oils and whatnot and tried to cite us for a labeling issue, which we corrected on the spot. But the whole idea was that they were trying to hurt our party and make sure that we didn't have the party before we actually closed. Yeah,
Big Brother coming in there. On the issue of going back to the fact that hemp right now in America is going to go away as an industry, and unless something happens in this fall, is some people, Carlos, and I know you were in Tallahassee. I covered this, because in 23, 24, and 25, there were proposals in the legislature to revamp the system, as it were, because it is kind of, some people say, the wild, wild west. We've seen states outright already ban this product. It's not banned here. In fact, there's been no limitations on the the THC content. But there was, that was the bills they were pushing. But some I've heard say this, and I'd love to hear your response to it, that the hemp industry has to blame itself for the fact that it may be going out of business, because in some cases you weren't willing to, not you personally, but the industry wasn't willing to compromise to find, and some of these products which seem to some like pretty heavy duty, even though they might be legal right now through the loophole from the 2018 farm law, but nevertheless, working with government officials, and in this case, and then what ended up happening is because there was such a patchwork of laws around the country that somebody got into the president's ear, and and ultimately he says, okay, we're getting rid of this whole thing. I mean, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think every time that there's some sort of hidden agenda, whether it's in Tallahassee or in Washington, that in order to come up with a reason to ban or restrict, I mean, somebody starts crying about the kids. And, and
there has been legislation, we should say, that has been make sure that people under 21 do not have these products.
Right.
That is the law in Florida.
And it's constantly touted that the industry isn't regulated. Yet I was inspected last week for some reason. I don't understand how that works. But I mean, the idea is that, some kid could get their parents edible, and the edible is too strong, and, and a lot of things that just call for more regulation, or, call for more, if not more regulation, more enforcement of current regulation. But not for banning. This is the only industry that would ban anything. And, when you have people saying that, your packaging looks too much like a Skittles bar and there's hard Mountain Dew on store shelves, it's kind of hard to argue that we're not being picked on.
Again, if you're just tuning in, that's the voice of Carlos Hermida. He owns a couple of hemp shops in the Tampa Bay area. He's closing the one in St. Petersburg this weekend. We're also talking with Jackson McMillan. He's in the studio here, Democratic strategist. And I want to bring you both in talking about this. Let's talk about, because you're very much, Carlos, into politics. You have to be. It's part of, again,
I don't want to be.
You don't want to be, but it's part of you. So, okay, so a listener just writes up, we haven't even had the midterms. We're still 6 months away, a long time from what's going to happen in this state in terms of a new governor, new U.S. senator, or same old senator, and attorney general, cabinet positions. But people are looking at, who pay peripheral attention to politics, are looking at 2028. And so this reader, Martin, has written in, and he's talking about some of the candidates who are running. And he says, I only hope Andy Beshear, governor of Kentucky, elected in a red state twice. He says, no Gavin, no Kamala, sorry. I hope DeSand Trap runs again. I want to see those goofy cowboy boots with the curly toes. And I want him to set fire to $50 million of someone else's money. Okay. And he says, I've been watching this for 38 years. The transition from blue to purple to deep red, talking about the Sunshine State. Say hello to Governor Donalds, all that money plus the King's endorsement. Okay. So Andy Beshear, he mentions, though. I think Andy Beshear, you can like him or not. He's governor of Kentucky, kind of a, Southern Democrat who has been elected twice in a red state, which definitely makes him, I believe, I don't know if David Jolly's still using the same campaign person. I know last year he said he was working with the same people with Beshear. It brings it the fact in my lifetime, other than Barack Obama, the only two Democrats who've had a president were white Southerners, right? Moderates, and Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton. For you first, Carlos, to the extent that you care about presidential politics, what do you have anybody out there? Gavin Newsom's out there in the news a lot. Anybody else that's on your radar? Kamala Harris is going to maybe come back in.
Gavin Newsom's cool. I mean, I would be happy with him, but I am an AOC fan.
Yeah.
And I would like to see her.
I think the big story about her is maybe not so much for president, but for U.S. Senate, actually. There's a lot of talk about her challenging Chuck Schumer. And I know Democrats are down on Schumer. I know. So, again, we're talking a long way away, Jackson, but it's not that long, of course, in politics. Do you see if all these folks, and again, the field has not been settled yet, as it were, but there's a lot of people out there making noise. And after the November, they're definitely going to be popping up here. Any out there right now that you kind of look at favorably?
That's a great question. I think that Governor Beshear, he campaigns, and this is the funny thing about the way politics is right now, is that if you stand firm on economic principles that make things better for working people, and you don't back down when challenged on them, the moderates think you're a moderate and the progressives think you're a progressive. That's what happens all across the country. Especially with these white male candidates, frankly, right? So I think Governor Beshear could be a real contender. He spoke at Leadership Blue last year, which is the Democratic Party's annual conference. I was really impressed. Now, however, I do think Pete Buttigieg, while I don't agree with him on every policy or every issue, he works the media circuit like no one else does,
including going on Fox News,
right? And he's on talk shows, like late night talk shows, a lot right now. He is not running for anything right now, but yet he is. If you look at
technically, no,
but like he is raising more money than most of the other presidential.
Really,
he is raising a lot of money into his Win the Era PAC.
Okay,
incredible.
And then the other person I would keep an eye on, and while I know keeping and holding down the Georgia Senate seat is an important job,
is Jon Ossoff.
I got to tell you, I'm a huge Jon Ossoff fan.
Yeah.
I think the way he is a stick in the mud on his message on what he wants to deliver for working class Georgians and Americans. He doesn't back down when he's challenged on that. And that is exactly what we need to see right now. He's also he's very charismatic. He's very handsome. I had someone tell me the other day that Alexander Vindman looks like a middle schooler trying to not get shoved in a locker. And Jon Ossoff.
That's cool.
And there's, the point being, that is, people don't see you.
You wrote about attractive candidates do better.
They do. Yeah. I mean, people don't, we are in a vibes era, like it or not, right? People are seeing you in 6-second TikTok clips, not 2.5-hour debates, right? And so how much time people pay attention to you in this crazy attention economy is going to be based on how attractive you are. That is a major, major factor.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I want to cut you off, but we only have a few minutes. We got a call here. Then this person's not leaving their. Oh, they watch what? Okay. I'm going to read though another post that you wrote. I think is interesting. You wrote, data shows conversations between people who already know each other are 2.5 times more effective than cold outreach. And a rule of 2% phone contact rates and filtered text messages. Trusted messengers aren't a nice to have. They're the strategy. And you said, right, which means the best thing you can do as a volunteer for the Democratic Party is to go be a part of your community outside of politics. It will also make you a better strategist, a person to interact with people who don't think about politics as much as us. Book clubs, churches, hobbies, local businesses. The more we focus our energy inward, the less we focus it on the 99.9% of people who don't know who their member of Congress is, much less whether or not a FDB chair is doing a good job or not. That is, people on social media are obsessed by stuff like that. This is political speak for get a life. Stop waiting or feeling entitled and being dependent on other people to hand you power. Go build it yourself. Yeah, that seems empowering.
I mean, a few years ago, myself and a 19-year-old who had just got done being a Senate page were told by Democratic Party leadership that funding was coming to do college organizing in the midterms. In the presidential year in 2024. We waited month after month after month for that plan to be delivered on after being repeated promises. And finally, we just stood up and said, hey, let's build it ourselves. We raised $1.3 million. We had more staff in the state of Florida than the Harris campaign the entirety of the 2024 cycle.
Is that the Jaden
D'Onofrio, who's now running for state house in Palm Beach County?
Yeah,
he's fantastic. He was the ringleader very much. He and I co-founded it, but he was very much the face, and I was very proud to let him. He was so passionate about it, and he really took that mentality at 19 years old of I'm tired of waiting for someone else to give. I know this needs to get done. I'm just gonna do it. And I think that is something that that if you care about something, whether or not it is what's going on in the Middle East, whether or not it is, hemp and marijuana rights, right? Like power comes down to two things, money and manpower. If you can get enough people in a room listening to you and agreeing with you, you have power. If you have enough money in the bank that you can buy those people to be in those butts in those chairs and get the message out, you have power. And to quote Game of Thrones, power is perception, right? Like, I'm not going to read the whole fond of riddles, right? But like nobody is stopping you from building the things to fix the things you care about. And waiting on other people to do that for you is an excuse. And I firmly believe that.
Yeah, wow. I think they can be a life, a maxim, actually. We've only got a few seconds to go. Carlos, any last things you want to say to our audience here?
No, thanks for having me on.
Yeah. But your shop in Ybor is still thriving?
Yeah, the Ybor store is still thriving.
What's the name of it? You can tell us.
Chillum Mushroom and Hemp Dispensary.
Okay.
We still have Learn Euphoria. We're still going to be teaching how to microdose and how to grow mushrooms. And,
there you go. All right. Yeah. Hey, well, yeah. Thank you, Carlos. Carlos Hermida has been our guest, along with Jackson McMillan. He is the Democratic strategist. So, again, you're kind of keeping it low key this year, not involved in any campaigns, are you at all? Or?
My team's fundraising for a bunch of congressionals, but we are, and some other races across the country. But I personally am not involved in management or strategy consulting this cycle.
Well, thank you guys both for being in the studio here. Really appreciate that. Again, you're listening to WMNF Tampa, 88.5 FM. I want to thank Skip Sassy, who's been our engineer behind the board. Anthony Maduro has been taking the phone calls today. My partner, Ray Roa. We'll hear from Ray next week. He had to leave early today. And coming up next, Joe Ellen Schilke will be here with Art in Your Ear, and you're going to want to listen to that. And hey, I hope we see you tomorrow at Heatwave, Tropical Heatwave down in Ybor City. And so, again, for Ray Roa, I'm Mitch Perry. Thanks for listening. We'll see you here next week.
WMNF Tampa.